Welcome back, everybody. So everybody have a good morning? Everybody learn here a little bit? Not want to be a criminal? Excellent. Welcome back. I am going to now welcome Franklin Jones to the stage. Franklin is a CMO for Cequence Security. Just a little bit of background. Franklin has been involved in innovative cybersecurity startups for more than a decade. Prior to joining Cequence, Franklin held CMO positions at Bromium, Spike Security. And without further ado, I know that the content is more important than me, so let's bring Franklin to the stage. Thank you, Franklin.
All right, mic on? Sound good? Okay, cool. Thanks for attending this session. Appreciate it. So I want to focus, obviously, on what we believe is the #1 cyber threat facing organizations today. Going to explain why this is and how this works and why everybody should be concerned about it. And along the way, I'm going to share with you some research we did late last year with more than 200 large organizations across the U.S. to essentially validate what we suspected was happening. But bottom line is, over the last couple of years, there's been a couple or three different reports actually published on the amount of traffic on the internet that is purely malicious bot traffic. So if you look at the internet traffic as a whole, typically over the last few years, it's been 1/3 human, 1/3 good bots, 1/3 bad bots. But the bad bot guys are starting to increase now to where they're close to 40%, or even more than 40%. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with bots, but just as a level set there, it's machine-to-machine communication. There's lots of good bots. So, for example, if you go to a site like Kayak and you want to do searches for flights, bots will go out and find the good stuff, come back and say, here's all your options, and you make a decision. So those are good bots, but there's also bad bots who have much more malicious objectives in mind. So that's what we're going to talk about here. There's actually 3 phases to crafting and executing a bot attack. And phase 1 actually has nothing to do with bot attacks, but it is the fuel that feeds the fire, if you will. So data breaches like this from 2018, hopefully nobody from any of these companies are here, but these guys get all the headlines. And I'm sure many of you have seen some of these headlines. And not to throw Marriott under the bus here, but that was one that resulted in a loss of like 500 million stolen credentials, username and passwords, right? And that particular attack had been going on under the radar, if you will, for several years, and it finally was discovered. So this kind of stuff typically is not automated. This is a lot of work to get access, because obviously these companies are spending a lot of time and money on building a strong security infrastructure. So it's not a criticism at all. It's just sort of what it is. But in this case, in 2018, more than 5 billion new credentials have been stolen. Got all the headlines, but then the question is, after a week, it kind of goes away, and you wonder, so what happened? Did I lose my identity and I didn't know it? Or what's going on here? So this leads to phase 2, where the bad actors step in, and what they have to do in order to effectively launch a malicious bot attack on your organizations, they need 3 things. They need credentials, they need tools, and they need infrastructure. Well, the credentials come from phase 1, the data breaches. So the data breaches, all those records typically eventually find their way onto the dark web, sometimes very quickly, sometimes over a period of several months or longer. So these guys go on the dark web, and the first thing they do is get their credentials, then they find the tools, and they build their infrastructure. So we'll take a quick look at each one of those phases. In terms of credentials, Sanix dark web forum, this is one example of many examples on the dark web where the bad guys can go to acquire the credentials they need to launch the attacks. I highlighted collection #1 here because I don't know if you guys happen to see the stories on that particular topic that was out recently, where they discovered 773 million unique emails and 21 million unique passwords. But then it was dismissed like, that's old, that stuff has been out there for a year, that stuff's outdated. Well, the irony is it's almost never outdated, because it goes back to the fact these stolen credentials, username and password combinations, are rarely updated. If you think about your own, again, on Amazon, Netflix, what do you use? You don't change your password every day. It's just, you throw it up there once and you forget about it because you stay logged in. So sometimes those combinations remain active for years. So the fact that this particular theft and repository is old doesn't matter. It's still useful, and the bad guys know it. But also, what didn't make the headlines is collection number 2, 3, 4, and 5 shown here. And collectively, if you add them all up, there's 3.5 billion username password combinations available on the dark web for these guys to acquire at pennies on the dollar, which is actually kind of surprising here. So once they have their credentials, now they need a tool to really build and orchestrate their attack. And there's a couple different popular tools. One is SNIPR, very cheap, 20 bucks. And what's nice about SNIPR, if I was a bad guy, is that they do a lot of the hard work for you. And it's almost sort of this crowdsourced process where everybody builds and contributes their own configuration files to target specific websites and applications. So for example, here's a snapshot of some of the targets that have been pre-built. So if I'm a bad guy, I can literally check the box of who I want to target. So some of the popular names on here, as you can see, JetBlue, Netflix, HBO Now, Louis Vuitton, Subway, blah, blah, blah. So lots of prime targets. And again, if I'm a bad guy, that's all work that's done for me. So all I have to do is acquire those particular configuration files and launch my attack using SNIPR. Of note here, if lower left there in red is a particular configuration file that is no longer active. It was hot at one time. It's actually one of our customers, and we successfully blocked that, so that is no longer even an option, and they actually put down there in the lower left dead. They made the note themselves, so apparently that's no longer an attractive option for the bad guys. So you have your credentials, you have your tools, but if you want a different kind of a tool and allow you to get the infrastructure as well, Sentry MBA is always a good choice. Doesn't offer the configuration files that you're going to find with SNIPR, but it does give you the opportunity to build and launch a geo-distributed attack using 10,000 or more proxies distributed worldwide, so that if you're trying to figure out where this attack is coming from, it suddenly became a lot harder here. So it's a great strategy for disguising the attack as it's happening. So again, Sentry MBA and SNIPR, and there's several other tools out there that these guys are using. But again, the cost to acquire this is actually fairly inexpensive. And that's part of the issue here is the cost to build and launch these attacks. And this is why the amount of malicious bot traffic is increasing so much, is because it's easy to do. It's super easy to do, very inexpensive. You don't even have to be smart because a lot of these things are so pre-configured and canned for you as well. So phase 3 then, you got everything in place. You got the credentials, the tools, the infrastructure. You launch the attack. So the question is, where are you going with this attack? Who you're targeting? So the prime target for these attacks are what we describe as hyper-connected organizations. So these are really the way we do business today in the world is, through this digital economy where we've eliminated boundaries. We're talking to customers anywhere, anytime, 24/7. We're working with partners and suppliers across the world, all connected digitally. So those are prime targets because they always have externally facing web, mobile, and API application assets and services that are readily available. And again, from a credential standpoint, this web and mobile is where you would go to type in the username and password combinations. But in this case, we have automated bots distributed worldwide that are doing that very, 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 very quickly. And the problem here is that legacy security tools are really unable to detect and defend against these attacks, and we'll get into that, why that is the case. But the number of targets then for these kinds of attacks continues to grow as more and more organizations become digitally connected, because that is essentially the business model we're in today. So once they have that figured out, what exactly are they trying to do? What I've been describing here thus far is related primarily to account takeover, where, again, you're taking valid username and passwords from a site like Marriott, and you're basically testing them on other sites to figure out, will this work on site A, B, C, D, and so forth. And again, it happens quickly. It's easy to do, so why not? They just try all these different sites, and eventually some number of them will be successful in their login attempts. But there's also, if the credentials don't work on site A, B, and C, they can create fake accounts, and that happens a lot too. And we'll talk about that why in a minute. But then there's the other thing, which is super hard to detect, and most companies aren't even aware it's happening, is targeting the APIs that connect your business with other businesses. Because typically there's no user interface to that. And so in that case, these guys are writing automated scripts, and the bots will launch that to target APIs. And once they have that access, then they can get more integrated into your back-end system. So for example, if you're an Amazon customer, You place an order, so there's APIs then internally that are going to process your order, check inventory, handle payment. So again, the bad guys get access to that. It can really mess up the business logic for the application and cause havoc for your business or whatever the case may be. But beyond that, there's a number of different target objectives, and I won't go into all the details here, but this is just some of them. There's more. But gift card theft, for example, is one that once you have access to an account, you can get air miles if you're targeting airlines. We've seen that happen. Gift cards, of course, you can repurpose those to your own advantage. If you're creating fake accounts, there's actually I don't know if you saw the news story about this click farm in China where they had all these mobile phones lined up creating fake accounts and doing fake likes. It got so bad that Amazon noticed that one of the suppliers on their site, the small Chinese company, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here, but the small Chinese company, relatively unknown, had massive popular reviews. And so I don't know about you, but if I go to Amazon, I always search for the highest rated item and then go deeper to figure out if it's any good. So I actually found myself a couple of those items, but having read that article about the fake reviews, it did highlight the fact that to figure out if it's a fake review, you're going to notice that the review comment is pretty much the same over and over and over and over and over again. So I noticed that and I thought, okay, I'm not buying that shoe. So that was the end of that. But it happens. So it's a problem, and it's not just for Amazon. It could happen, in a variety of different businesses. Automated shopping carts. I love this one. There's this bot that was written specifically to buy hot new sneakers. So you may have heard about this one where Kanye West came out with a brand new shoe. Automated bots were created to go and literally buy up all those shoes and resell them on the black market for double the price. So that happens. It's incredible. So meanwhile, the valid customer is not able to get access to the shoe that they want at the normal price. So there's that. And then denial of inventory. A lot of bots will go into different sites and load up shopping carts. And after a period of time, those shopping carts automatically get unloaded because no action was taken. But that doesn't stop them. They go back and reload them. So the shopping carts are always full. And again, if you're a normal customer trying to do business, you're going to run into that problem. So there's lots of examples of this. This is just a handful of them, and your business may or may not relate to all of those, but you get a sense of what they're trying to do. But in terms of indications of a potential attack, here's some potential indicators. The obvious one is the spike in traffic targeting those applications. And as a result of that, you might see, or your customers might see, slower response time or no response time at all. And then we actually had one customer who had, prior to working with us, thought, oh, wow, we were a super popular company. Now we're going to really upgrade our server infrastructure to handle this traffic. Or even worse, in some cases, if it's cloud-hosted, you have auto-scaling capabilities, and the increase in capacity handles automatically, and then you get this massive bill from Microsoft or Google saying your cloud-hosted app, you're paying a lot more for it than you think. And then you get complaints from customers, and ultimately customers can't log into their accounts, and it becomes a problem for your company's reputation. So there's so many different impacts here, not just financial fraud, but reputation and just wasted time and wasted money as a result of these kinds of attacks. A few other fun facts. They're not always high volume, could be low and slow. So, for example, if you choose to use, I shouldn't say you, but if the bad guys choose to use Sentry MBA and launch a geo-distributed attack, it can go slow and slow over a period of weeks and months. And then if you're monitoring traffic to your site, you're seeing literally nothing unusual, nothing at all. So you have no clue whatsoever that there's anything bad happening. That's a brilliant strategy. So you have to figure out a different way to identify that as malicious bots. In some cases, they don't want to go low and slow. They're going all in. One of our customers over the holiday weekend, Labor Day weekend it was, where the staff was pretty much out of the office on holiday, enjoying themselves. So they weren't really tracking this stuff, and they came back and found out that more than 90% of the traffic on their internet over that period was malicious bot traffic. So it happens, and that's not a one-off. That happens quite a bit. So there's an indicator. The proxy network like Sentry NBA that I mentioned, it could actually use your home routers, and we ran into that as well, where a customer was attacked by bots that had compromised home routers. So if you're looking at IP addresses, it looks like a normal thing, some guy at home trying to log onto the network and do business. And And then smart attackers will understand defense techniques. There are defense techniques to detect and block these attacks, but like JavaScript, for example. And in that case, JavaScript gets inserted into the communication with the endpoint to essentially validate whether this is a human involved or not. But the smart guys have figured out a way around that as well. And the success rate for all of this for account takeover is about 10%. And you might think, wow, that's not bad. I mean, but these guys typically will launch attacks of 1 million, using 1 million stolen credentials, for example. So 10% of 1 million, what's that, 100,000? That's pretty good. These 10% success rate, nothing wrong with that. And then online gaming attacks are really super hard to detect and stop because there's typically API to API communication, and that's a much harder process, but we won't go into that right now. And finally, now you know why concert tickets are gone before you even get a chance to buy them, because these guys buy them up, and then the next day you want the concert? Oh, here it is at double the price. So there you go. So let's talk about some of the research we did late last year with Osterman Research based up in Seattle. We asked them to go out and really get more data from us to validate or refute our thoughts on all of this. So they talked to 211 companies. As you can see, the number of employees, 16,800. These are big companies. And on average, 482 web, mobile, and API applications were targeted. You know what's interesting there is what we found along the way here is a lot of companies, on the security side, I should say, didn't know how many applications they had. So there was apparently a disconnect between the applications team and the security team. Things get rolled out, security guys don't know it, and they have to protect these things, but they don't know they're there. So I can see that would be a huge problem. And 100% of them experience bot attacks. So in terms of the applications being targeted, web apps obviously are the easiest targets, so that made total sense here. Mobile apps are actually the fastest growing now. There was a report recently on that the number of attacks specifically using mobile apps and targeting mobile apps is increasing dramatically. APIs as well are significant. And it doesn't matter where these applications are deployed, whether they're in the cloud, on premises, private cloud, wherever the case may be, they're still targets and the bad guys know how to reach them. And then I showed you earlier the different kinds of objectives. So we asked them, what are you seeing on your network? And account takeover, which is the one I kind of profiled here, was number one. But application DDoS came in number two. So that happens sometimes when they're doing the shopping carts and the massive volumetric attacks and things like that can create application DDoS situations pretty easily. And you can see the other ones that came in here along the way. I was surprised that gift card theft was so low. But again, some of the companies we were targeting to may or probably didn't even have gift cards as part of their business model, so that probably makes sense. And then in terms of the staffing, we wanted to understand, so if this is such a big problem, what are you guys doing to staff your security team to handle this issue? So the question here was, how many full-time people do you have focused specifically on bot detection and defense? So you can say on average, well actually 58%, 2 or less, which was a little bit of a surprise. Equally surprising was that 12% had 5 or more focused on it. So clearly that group had already suffered a lot of damage previously and they staffed up to address the problem. But we also learned from this that part of the reason this number is not higher is it's so hard to find the security talent you need to hire them on your team to do this kind of work. So that makes sense as well. Then the time and cost, and this goes back to the fact that they may or may not have the tools necessary to effectively detect and mitigate these kinds of malicious attacks. So we asked them, so how long is it taking and how much is it costing you guys in this context here? So on average, 68 hours to detect an attack and 136 hours to mitigate it. So that's a lot. But again, it's probably because it's relatively new in terms of attack problems they're facing here. But it's a significant amount of time, and you can see the cost of the fully loaded cost, I should mention, of the security team they have in place. So at some point you could do the math and figure out then what the actual cost is, human cost, to detect and mitigate these bot attacks for these organizations. And what about budgets to really help focus and solve on this problem? The good news here is that almost half said yes, we do have budgets now allocated for this, and the rest of them moving toward that, but not quite there yet. And again, not surprising at all, because this is a problem that's become higher on the radar in the last couple of years. So that's it for the report. Just FYI, if you want to see the full copy of the report, it's much longer than what I'm presenting here in the interest of time. But if you go to our website, homepage down at the bottom, lower left there, you just click the button and get that report and enjoy it at your leisure. Now, in terms of how do you stop this stuff? We've talked about the problem. Clearly, it's a growing problem, but what do you do to stop this? So most organizations, we learned from the research, by the way, rely on 3 different tools to identify and stop mitigated, or bot attacks, I should say. CDNs are a great, obvious choice because they're already there. And a lot of the organizations we talked to relied on CDNs to push content out. So in one sense, it makes sense. Why not just add in the security capabilities you need there to detect and stop these attacks? The problem here is that because these CDNs typically sit inline detection has to be done very, very quickly. And in this case, when you're looking for malicious bot attack content, it's not that easy to identify. It really takes a little bit of time and effort. So for that reason, it can add latency if you put too much of a burden on it, and it's going to be somewhat ineffective in that case. It really was never designed for security anyway. And the other thing CDNs can't do well is protect all of these targeted app channels. So specifically, web, mobile, and API can't do it all quite very well. Now, WAFs, Web Application Firewalls, widely deployed product, and I'm sure most of you have one already. Same situation, though. It sits in line, wasn't really designed for this kind of detection. What it's really good at is detecting known bad vulnerabilities in applications and threats to those applications and then stopping those. So very good at that. But again, this kind of attack has nothing to do with that. So where it really falls apart is because it sits in line, it can't provide insight into the underlying behaviors and intent of these application transactions that are determined to be malicious. And then, oops, wrong one. And then the third category of product that is starting to be used in these organizations are what we call first-gen bot management applications, or tools, I should say. And this is good because this is the first class of tool that was actually purpose-built specifically to detect and stop the growing amount of malicious bot traffic. But this first generation, the problem there was you have to, first of all, discover the applications on the network. So again, I mentioned from the research that we did, and we actually just did focus groups on this as well, there's a huge disconnect we were not aware of in terms of the application guys rolling out apps and security guys not being aware of it. Not sure if that's the case in your organization, but because of that, from a security perspective, if they realize there are potential targets for bot attacks, they have to first figure out what applications do I need to protect. And unfortunately, these first-generation tools are unable to do that. Beyond that, they require a lot of manual modifications to your applications using JavaScript or mobile SDKs to instrument those applications to help in the detection process. And even with that, most of these products are unable to detect the back-end API targets by these bots. So why is it so hard then to detect these things and defend against them? The big difference here between traditional security tools is that these malicious bots, there's no malicious content here. This is, especially with account takeover, this is just username and passwords, which is what you would expect to see coming to your applications. So there's no malware, no viruses, worms, APTs, nothing like that, which is traditional security tools are really, really good at. It could be literally as simple as a username and password. So because we're not looking then for malicious content, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for the underlying behavior and intent. And that's super hard to figure out. And that takes time because you have to look at the complete, the multidimensional analysis of the flow of the traffic between the bad guy on one end and the target servers or APIs on the other end. So this is where actually AI, artificial intelligence, can come into play and actually contribute real value. Because what has to happen is that you can't do this in line. You have to basically look at a copy of this traffic and do the analysis in this multidimensional way. And then from that, create a fingerprint based on that understanding, that insight of the behavior and intent, and say that is known to be malicious bot traffic. And then once you have the fingerprint created, then you can automatically mitigate that traffic. And this, by the way, can all be done almost in real time, but the distinction in here is it can't be done inline because then you would introduce latency into the process, and you don't want that. So the basically flow looks like that then. It starts with app traffic coming into an AI analytics platform. First of all, is it human or is it bot? Makes that determination. Then is it good bot or bad bot? Makes that determination, and then mitigates the bad bot traffic. So it is a complex process, and this, again, you can't imagine doing this in a line with a traditional security tool. That just can't happen. So out of the Osterman report, too, we asked them at the end of all this, given this world you're living in here, we presented a list of 15 or 20 different wish list requirements. This came up as the top 5. And I think part of this has to do with this combination of, yes, we want to stop the attacks and have stronger security, but we also want to spend a lot less time on this. We want the problem to just automate itself and go away. So the benefits of these 5 that they requested were both the security benefits, but also productivity gains and economic benefits as well through time and cost savings. So that made total sense in retrospect, looking at that. So bottom line here, you can assume you're a target then. Doesn't mean you will be, but you could be if you're one of these hyper-connected enterprises that does rely on web, mobile, and APIs to connect to your partners, your customers, your suppliers in a lot of different ways. And again, the security traditional tools will only look at malicious content. And if you've seen one or more of the early warning indicators I mentioned, then you should probably take it seriously. Bottom line on Cequence, I know this isn't a product thing, but you probably figured out by now that we're kind of in this space, and what we've built is this open distributed software platform that's going to consolidate a lot of different application security services, starting with this bot defense problem. We've pretty much solved that with this AI-powered engine we've built, and as a result, then no appliances, no signatures, no latency, no application changes. So that's pretty much it. I hope that was helpful. I would encourage you to get a copy of that report if you'd like to know more about what your peers are living through on this particular challenge, and give you a 3-minute and 30-second time rebate so you can enjoy the show. But if you get a chance to, please come by, stop by and see our booth right outside here.
And there is no rebate because we encourage questions.
Oh,
so.
okay.
Does anybody have a question? We'd love to take any questions that anybody does have while we have this time. We don't have a mic. Ron, can you grab a mic for me, please? That'd be great so we can capture this. Appreciate it.
Sorry, no rebate. Trying to offer you a rebate, but no
content.
Rebate.
Get it in.
Does the solution that you provide replace the existing traditional security devices and systems we have, or is an add-on to it?
It is. At this point, it's an add-on, although I should say the platform, not to get, again, too much in the product stuff, we're creating a platform because what customers have told us is we don't want to add more stuff. We want to consolidate and simplify, reduce complexity. So the best way to do that is a platform that can add multiple application security functions, all leveraging that same analytics engine. So that's the path we're going down. So today, we work with other products to do what needs to be done in terms of enforcement and policy and information exchange. But moving forward, you'll see less and less complexity, and I hope that answers your question.
That's great. Any other questions? One right back here.
Is it an open source product? And if so, do you have a community edition?
We use open source components a lot in the platform, and we have an open API architecture, so integration with other stuff is pretty easy to do, but it's not like a, you know.
Any other questions? A couple things then. Franklin first. Let's give Franklin another round of applause. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You'll be here all day, right?
Yep.
Okay, so please, I encourage you to visit Franklin at the Cequence table, learn a little bit more about the solution and how they're solving problems in the marketplace.